I've been a longtime member of SRI. Was involved in the founding of SRI and served as its first director. Oh, originally, back in the day, I was doing work with elementary, middle, and high schools all over Georgia who were interested in really taking ownership of their own decision making and their own professional learning. And it was through an organization that Carl Glickman had begun called the League of Professional Schools. And we were, although not a part of the coalition, we were certainly closely aligned with some of the ideas of the Coalition of Essential Schools. And the coalition was closely aligned with the work of Critical Friendship. Actually, Critical Friendship grew up out of the coalition, or alongside the coalition schools. And so I became involved. I went to a week-long institute. It was when they at that time they were doing retreats. So we actually went away and stayed together in a big house up in Massachusetts, and we went through an institute. And Carrie Brennan and Jean Thompson Grove, and I can't remember now who else were the facilitators for that group. So that was my first introduction to the idea of the work of working in critical friendship with others in order to improve practice. And I was really intrigued by the ideas of it and the practice of it, and tried to start my own group, and that didn't go too well, and so learned a lot from that. And then Jean asked me if I would become involved in what was called the Accountability Council. It was really a group of people who Jean and Faith, being the directors of the work at that time, brought us together to help, to really serve as critical friends to them as they were leading the work. So we would give them feedback, we would do consultancies with them, we would, those kinds of things. We acted as a critical friends group. And about not too awfully long later, after that, the Annenberg Foundation, that was the home of both the coalition and the National School Reform Faculty, which is what SRI was known as at the time, was at Brown University. And the Annenberg Foundation supported both of those enterprises financially and organizationally. And they decided to take a different tack, to focus the work in a different way. So NSRF was left with needing to find a new organizational home. And so the search was on, that Jean and really Faith led that search for a new home. And I went to a meeting, it was a coalition meeting in Atlanta at Jean's invitation, to meet with leaders from the Harmony School. And they were candidates. They were very interested in NSRF becoming part of their program and part of their school. And they had multiple outreach programs, and NSRF was going to be their first national outreach program. They were a coalition school, and they seemed to be really aligned with the ideas and the mission of collaboration, adult collaboration for the benefit of students, with what we were trying to do in NSRF. And they offered an organizational home. At the time, there was no interest in building any kind of organizational structure, freestanding organizational structure around the work. It was, let's find another home, just like we found a home at Brown University. So Jean invited me to that meeting because I had done work with schools and governance and leadership. So I went to the meeting. we discussed the pros and cons, and Jean and Faith made the decision to move the NSRF program to Harmony School. And at that time, we moved as an accountability council with them, that we continue to be their critical friends. So initially, things went pretty well, and during the honeymoon period, that things often do. And then it became more and more clear there was a real mismatch between, there was a growing mismatch between the goals of the Harmony School Organization and the goals of NSRF. We, meaning NSRF, began losing control. We went from having full control over budget, personnel, programming, etc., to having less and less and less control, and less transparency in how those decisions were being made. Although on the surface, it appeared that it was all collaborative, in reality, it didn't turn out that way. Didn't actually work in that manner. It was on paper, the theory was that, and then the way it worked was different than that. So we went along with that. We're there for a number of years, and really struggled. Really, it was a very tumultuous time in the life of NSRF, and then in the lives of the leadership of NSRF, and probably in the lives of the leadership of Harmony School as well. And we really struggled to find a way to work together, to collaborate, and we had hundreds of meetings, hundreds of hours of meetings trying to come to agreements. And it just eventually came down to that we felt like we had to make a decision. That wasn't going to change. The situation at Harmony was not going to change to the extent that we felt like it needed to change. And so by that time, Stephen Stroll was the director of the organization, and Stephen had, really got caught in this, this pulling apart of the two organizations, and I stepped up. I was the chair of the Accountability Council. I was and so I really stepped in to try to negotiate some of that, because there was no other leadership of the organization at that time. So with a lot of trepidation and consideration and conversations with members of the organization, we eventually decided what we needed to do is form our own organization. And so we did. And we, with the generous support of the Bay and Paul Foundation, we incorporated ourselves. And we did this without the knowledge of Harmony School. So we incorporated ourselves. One of the issues was around the ownership of our materials and who owned it. And because we were not an official legal entity, we couldn't technically own our stuff, our materials, our intellectual knowledge, intellectual property. So we formed ourselves an organization thinking that would give us the structure through which we could then own our materials and have say over how they were used. And that was not the case. So we decided to leave. There was a racial incident around issues of confrontation between a white man and a African-American man at one of the events. And that really sort of brought to the fore the whole mismatch between what we were trying to do and how people were perceiving Harmony School. And so with that as the real impetus, even though there'd been a lot of other things to happen, that kind of pushed us to the place that we said, we're going to form our own organization. So we did, and we didn't even have a checking account. I think we had, did we have $10,000? Maybe. I don't know. It was pretty wild. So we had to have a checking account. Chris and Heidi both decided to come with us, which was a huge move and personal sacrifice on their part, and it was a big change for everybody involved, and it was hard and not graceful. So we left, and we formed our own organization, and we were really committed to the notion that we were going to form an organization that was more in line with what the principles of our work were. It was going to be inclusive. It was going to be diverse. It was going to be transparent. It was all the things that undergird collaborative critical friendship, is that everyone has a voice, everyone gets heard. Everything's talked about in the room and not outside the room. People know what's happening. So what we did, I helped develop this along with other board members, and then Kevin really became a real, he was my external coach, if you will. He knew a lot about the organization, and he knew a lot about organizational development, and he was in the work, but he was on the outside of the work, and that was really important to me. I needed someone who wasn't in the midst of it, but knew enough about it to help support us moving forward. So we decided that we were going to, if we aired on anything, we're going to err on the side of being inclusive and giving people more information than that they ever needed or wanted to have. So we had our first meeting actually in Boston, and as you probably well know, and we had the most people who had ever to date come to a winter meeting ever, the first time ever. We had the largest crowd we'd ever had at a annual meeting of the organization. Linda Darling Hammond had agreed to be our keynote, and we were so excited. We didn't know what we were. It was really quite a moment. And so at that meeting, we had the first organizational meeting, and it was a y'all come meeting. It was like, if you're interested in this organization we formed, you come on, and we've got work to do, because we had no infrastructure, we had no staff, we had no way of getting work done, and we needed and wanted the input from a lot of people. We wanted people to buy in, have a say in the formation of this organization. We were really very committed to that. So the whole notion of transparency and inclusiveness was extremely important. So we had work groups of volunteers, and we had a work group around the mission and guiding principles that Kim Carter and other people were on that did incredible work. We had a work group around governance, and we formed our first board. So the board really, our first board was really the Accountability Council, and now we just called it a board. And I served as both the chair of the board and the acting director. And so we called it acting because interim, because I was like, I'm not doing this forever, right? And there was no money to pay me, and so little did we know it would take about 5 years before we would be able to hire somebody. But it wasn't 5 years, but it was, I don't know, it was a while. And so anyway, we had a really commitment. We were going to move from an appointed board to a fully elected board. And then we had to get that figured out, how we were going to do that. So we put together a work committee to take that up to really look at structures about how people structure boards and how boards are elected. I mean, we put people to work, and then people worked, and then they would bring back to the board recommendations for action. So we looked at our website. We had to have a website. We didn't have a website anymore. We had, etc. And of course, we had a distributed office staff. So, you know, Chris and Heidi were in Bloomington at the time, and I was here in Athens, and everybody else was where everybody else is, all over the country. So anyway, over a period of time, we actually grew into being an organization. We had some infrastructure, we had some bylaws, we had a structure for electing a board. It was a really proud day to have when we had that first board election. It was just a moment. You know, would anybody run? Would people vote? You know, that sort of thing. And it set us on our way. And it was hard. That's a hard transition for people who have committed a lot of their time and energy and affection into an organization, and then to pull out, to step away from leadership roles and to allow room for other people to come in. And that was really hard. But people stepped up and did it, and said, no, this is what we need to do. And so we left the organization. We started our own organization. We had to leave Harmony without our intellectual property. They had, unbeknown to the organization as a whole, copyrighted some of the language and of the organization. And so we could not use that language any longer. We continued to use it, and they continued to ignore it until they realized we really were an organization, and that's when they threatened to sue us, and as you well know. And so we decided it was worth it. The organization wasn't about the name, the organization was about the work. And we had the people, and we knew the work. We had the people who had created the work. And so we thought that was going to be enough to sustain us, and it was what sustained us. And so that's how we began. But it really set the foundation, I hope, I think, for where we are right now, and that we were able to make a successful transition to a new full-time director, you, and then now we've made another transition, and we're stronger than we've ever been. We've stayed true to our, inclusiveness and transparency, and I'm really proud that we've been able to do that. Right. Well, first of all, I think, we're an organization. That's one thing. That's a big thing. We actually have some infrastructure, and we now pay benefits, and we have a payroll and the thing. So I think that's one thing. And we're a recognized organization, professional organization, around the country and around internationally as well. I think also the work is really deepened. We've moved away from that we're the protocol people, that we now are really have a better, deeper understanding of what it means to work in collaboration and community with one another, especially I think in the last few years under your leadership. We've really taken on what is it to live our mission, and that is one of the things that we always aspired to, is to really live out the mission of the organization. And I think we're on our way to doing that. I think there's a lot yet to be known, a lot that we don't know about, a lot that we still need to know and need to work on. But I think we have really grown in our understanding of the complexity and of the importance of living out the mission that we have of being fiercely committed to educational equity and excellence. So that's one of the things, one of the ways I've seen that the diversity of the current board is another way. We really were committed to, but also concerned about the diversity of the organization and how to make the organization, how to help the organization be, and how to help support a more diverse leadership within the organization. And it's really uh, reflective of that commitment, I think, that we have this wonderfully diverse board that has various kinds of experience, various years of experience, bring different kind of life experiences to the conversation. And I think that's one of the other hallmarks that shows how we have grown as an organization. Well, I think it's somewhat more of the same. This whole notion of deepening our both individual and collective knowledge and understanding and skill to take on the hard issues that face our schools, our public schools and public and independent schools in this country. I think that is, we're beginning to learn more about the complexity of that, how hard it is, and what it takes to build the kind of professional capacity within a school in order to begin to address that. And then and within a culture that's very diverse, but also very divided at the same time. And I think that I would hope in 10 years that we will have made even greater progress toward that we would have some broader shared understanding of what it takes in order to, and awareness, personal and collective awareness of our own personal role, whether unintentionally an unknown role in maintaining the status quo and disrupting the status quo, and how do we continue to do that. And I think that's, so I don't think it's going to change. I think it's just going to get more apparent is what I think. And more and more complex and more challenging as we kind of uncover the layers of the work in a way that we don't know, myself included. And I've done a lot of learning about my own personal practice within the work in the last 10 years, and I'm looking forward to doing more of that. So, and I'm hoping there are going to be a lot of people walking beside me. So. I think SRI is a group, an organization made up of people who are really intrigued by, as well as some people who are really committed to, this notion of how you use collaboration in order to take on hard issues around teaching and learning in schools. And how do you do that? And how do you build the individual and collective capacity to do that? And I think SRI has something to offer around that conversation. We don't have content. We don't have a package, but what we have is a set of principles, a set of knowledge and understandings, and some tools and strategies for people to use to make the kind of schools they want to make in their own they're on the place where they do teaching and learning. And I think that's both unique, and I think it's also, it tends to sometimes be dismissed that process is less important than content. And I think that has gotten us in a lot of trouble in schools, that we can just do content, we just have the right curriculum, and the other process is, this soft thing that happens and it's not talked about or paid attention to. And I think that that's gotten us, that's really been one of the troubling aspects of school. It's gotten us in a lot of, we think there's simple solutions for really complex problems. And I think we know, SRI knows, that's not the way it is. Well, I was trying to think about that. That's I mean, I could pick out moments, that really stand out. The day we announced it on video to our membership that we had started our own organization. That was a special moment. But I think I'm gonna use the 3 winter meetings to mark it, mark moments. The first winter meeting in Boston, when we didn't know going into that if we were going to exist, 6 months later, much less that we would have people show up. If we were going to, it's kind of like throwing a party. Would people really come, and could we really pay for it, and etc. And they did, and we did, and that was quite a moment. And then, um, symbolically, it was a moment. I believe that I'm right about this. 5 years later, Brian Stevenson was the keynote speaker. And that to me, and I had stepped down, you had become the director. Um, and that to me was a moment when it said, we're beginning on our way to living out this mission that we have. That was really sort of, yeah. And then we had a new director. We've made the successful transition. We're back in Boston. We have people with us, and people are continuing to join us. And we are talking about really hard issues, and people are staying in the room. And that was a moment. And now we're going to do the 10th one. And it will be another moment to mark of where we are now. Now we have a new director. We have a woman of color directing our organization. And we have this diverse board. We have a growing number of people engaged in the work with us. So we're continuing to learn about what it takes to do this work. And that is another big milestone, I think, coming up on the 10 years coming in November. Yeah. I usually say something like, it's not a panacea, but it is, it has the most potential of anything that I know to help people develop the capacity to do the hard work of teaching in schools, and to feel supported, and um, and to feel like you're continuing to learn about your practice. I think that's what I would say to people. That if you want to come and be both challenged and supported, or challenged in a supportive environment, SRI offers that. And I think that's what I would say to people. And it in some ways it lacks, I don't know, maybe it lacks some of the cachet. It's not a simple answer. It's not a thing. It is it's much more a way of being in the world, I think, and a way of being in your practice. Happy 10th anniversary, SRI.